Salute is a program for and about men and women who have served our country. Our program includes news about the laws that affect veterans, information on benefits and services, and news from veterans organizations. And now, our host, Bob Peters.
Hello and welcome to Salute. I'm your host, Bob Peters, and my guest today is Mr. Rene Sparenberg. He originally from Holland, am I correct?
Correct.
Tell us a little bit about yourself, because you've had quite an interesting life. And but first, I'd like to know when you were born, and you were born over there. You live here now, right?
I was born in on the Isle of Java in the Dutch East Indies at the time, and the city where I was born called Semarang on the north coast of Java. And later on, when I was about 8 years old, my parents moved from Semarang to the southern part of Java, in a little city called Yogyakarta. And that is where I spent my youth until I was 9 years old, when my parents went on leave to the Netherlands. My father was working for a timber company in the Netherlands, and his contract was that every 6 years he was entitled for a leave of 6 months in his mother country. So that was in 1927 when my father and my mother, with my sister, little brother and a baby, plus a servant, went by boat from Java to the Netherlands, and spending there my father's vacation, so to say. But when that was over and he had to go back to the Dutch East Indies, they left me for proper education, school education, and study at the university in the Netherlands. I was then 8 years old.
Right, and you, I have some pictures here when I get to them. You got involved in sports.
Yes, from the beginning. My original sport, like many Europeans, was soccer, football. Not the football we know here in the United States, but it was soccer. But my uncle and my aunt, where I was boarding, found soccer too dangerous, and then I changed my sports to field hockey. And in field hockey, I was rather fast on my feet, and I became a field hockey player fit for the Dutch team represented at the Olympics in Berlin, eventually in 1936.
Yeah, I have some pictures. This picture here is...
It's my club where I was a member. The club was called Hilversum.
And then later...
And that is a city south of Amsterdam.
Uh-huh. So it was a club you belonged to, and then you played international, right?
And then I was chosen in our national team, and I played matches. I think I played all in all roughly 20 matches against Belgium, France, Germany, Switzerland, Denmark, and until I was at an age that my father called me because he wanted me as his successor for his business in the Dutch East Indies. And that was in 1939.
This is the team, right?
And that was our Olympic team, yes.
Uh-huh. Now, how did you get to be part of an Olympic team?
Well, I was a member of a normal team in the city of Hilversum. And there, there was an Olympic committee, of course, and a department of the Olympic committee was the Department of Field Hockey, and they had people who were watching the best players or the players who could be chosen for international play. So at one stage, apparently they found me good enough, and I had 3 matches as a sort of trial match in a so-called B team of the Netherlands, and I was fairly quick. I was left outside. Later on, I was center forward, and eventually they found me fit enough and good enough to become a permanent member of the national team.
And this?
And that is the the bronze medal which we won during the Olympics in Berlin in 1936.
Yeah, this is beautiful. This is, I mean, everybody knows the 36 Olympics. I mean, that was during Mr. Hitler and the story with Jesse Owens and all that.
Yes, Jesse Owens, Metcalf, and I used to know Jesse Owens during that period pretty well, because the Olympic Village, of course, was very exclusive. There was a restaurant meeting place for family members and for visitors, and that is where you could be to meet people. But for the rest, the Olympic Village was very well protected from foreigners, and nobody could enter the Olympic Village. The ladies, of course, they had their own Olympic Village somewhere else, the lady athletes, and and we had in that Olympic Village, we had little houses where in each house 4 people were living, and it was, of course, a routine every morning, training every morning, doing all kinds of exercises, except for the day that you had to play a match, because the Olympic Stadium was roughly about 15, 16 miles from the Olympic Village. The Olympic Village, by the way, in 1938, 2 years after the Olympic Games, we had a match against Germany again, and we visited the old Olympic Village, and this was a military village now. And all these little houses were occupied by officers or coming officers by the Dutch military.
Yeah, so shortly after the Olympics, the war broke out, right?
Yes, well, the Olympics were in '36, and I think it was in September '38 that Hitler invaded Poland. By the way, in the meantime, and I think it was in the beginning of '38, he annexed Austria, because he claimed that the Austrians were more German than being independent. And so that happened in 1938, because I remember that we had an international match against Germany in '38, and before that we were the guest at a soccer match between the British, between England and Greater Germany. And in the Germany team, they had positions 3 Austrian soccer players. And that was the first time that Germany and Austria were together. And by the way, it was very, what shall I say, we were very pleased that they got beaten by the British at that time, if I remember, something like 6-0 or something.
Yeah.
Yeah, because the British were very good at soccer at that time. Jesse Matthews was a hero. He could play around you in a square meter without losing the ball. But anyway, we were visitors as guests to watch the match between Greater Germany, as they called themselves, and England. And I remember that the German team, they stood to attention to the national anthems, and they were very military with their arm, the Hitler salute, whereas the British, they were just looking around a little bit and shuffling around until the match began. And within short, I remember, I think Germany lost with big figures, something like 5-1 or 5-0. I don't remember.
So they didn't celebrate, the Germans then, huh? What do you remember when the war started? You were telling me about your parents a little bit.
Yes, when the war started, I was in the Dutch East Indies. The war started in 1938 in Europe, and we were still free in the Dutch East Indies. It was known that the Japanese were not very friendly people because they needed more room for themselves. And I remember that on the Isle of Borneo, they got a permit to work there in the forest to cut wood for their needs in Japan. And before we knew it, they were building 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 tennis courts at legs, whereas the Dutch government at that time said, why 5 or 6 of these tennis courts? Because you are only a small unit. But these tennis courts became a landing strip for aircraft. They were
an alternative moment.
Yes, but anyway, they were there, and it was still in peacetime. And I remember that a delegation of the Japanese came to the government of the Dutch East Indies in Batavia, and they had discussions and this and that, until, of course, at one stage they declared war, or rather, unexpectedly, they went to the Philippines first, and from the Philippines they went to Macau, and from Macau to Hong Kong, and from Hong Kong to French, at that time French Guiana, and from French Guiana to Thailand. And the Emperor of Thailand made a deal with the Japanese insofar that he allowed the Japanese to use his territory, provided the Japanese would not spoil or damage anything in his country. And that is what the Japanese, of course, accepted gladly. And but still, their aim was eventually to go to the north, to Burma. But the problem was that being in Bangkok and Bampong, they had to go all around the peninsula of Malaysia to get to the other side, to Rangoon, which was Burma. And that is when they started to think about building that railroad. That railroad, by the way, the first part from Rangoon to Bangkok through the jungle was started by the British. The British gave it up at one stage because the terrain to go through was so difficult. They had to build something like a couple of hundred bridges over rivers, over ravines. They had to cut some mountains. So the British gave up their plan. But they had the plan on paper, on the drawing board. And the Japanese, more or less, literally took over that plan, but instead of digging tunnels through mountains, they cut the mountains. And that is where we came in trying to cut the mountains with dynamite and with all kinds of things. All by hand, no machinery. The only assistant we had were a couple of Thai owners of elephants who were actually the animals who slept big pieces of wood from the jungle
I've seen them do
to
that.
the area where they needed the wood. Anyway, this was the start of building the leg part of the railroad, where the English gave it up because of bad circumstances. And the Japanese took more or less the same stretch, except for the fact that they did not dig tunnels through mountains, but they cut the mountain apart and put the railroad next to it.
Now you were doing this. This is before the war, or when?
No, that was during the Pacific War.
Yeah.
And we were a POW because we surrendered.
Okay, see, now that's what we didn't tell people, that you were a POW.
Huh?
We didn't tell people that when you were doing this, you were a prisoner of war?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, see, we skipped the part there about when you joined the military. That's why I'm trying to catch up. You joined the Holland, right? You were.
I was, yeah, and when I was sent to the Dutch East Indies, I was still a reserve military, and I became in the Dutch East Indies a part of our military system, and I even obtained the rank of Sergeant First Class, which was, in my opinion, an honor, because 90% of the army had to salute me.
Oh yeah, that's good.
But
you were telling me before you were a machine gunner.
Yes.
And you had a very good aim with the hand grenade, eh?
Yes, with a hand grenade. Yes.
Yeah.
But that hand grenade was you had to throw it at a certain methods, because you had to dismantle the, how do you call it, that thing?
Pin?
The pin, and you had to throw it this way. And I used to throw it that way, but that was not allowed.
Yeah.
And but anyway, you can laugh about it, but it was a serious matter. Mm-hmm. And it was a very great disappointment for many of the conscripts when almost the period that they had to reserve, that they had to serve was over, and our Prime Minister said the danger from the east is, or he did not say the danger from the east. He said the danger is so serious that we keep your unit for another 6 months. And this was just 10 days before the first 6 months would be over. So it was a sort of revolt with many of our soldiers there, that they were very disappointed that they had to stay for another 6 months. But anyway, it had to be done, and it was then that our unit was stationed at the coast of the North Sea. And I was so amazed, because the danger came from the east, and the North Sea is in the west. And I dared to ask my captain, what are we doing here? Because I thought the danger is coming from the other side. And he said, there's nothing you have to talk about it. You have to listen, and you have to be obedient and follow orders.
Oh, it's the same in our armed service. Yours is not the reason why.
Yeah.
You know, yeah.
So we were sent to the North Sea coast, and that was not too bad, though, because it was beautiful weather in the summer, and you were lying in the dunes, and of course I was a machine gunner, and I was staring at the North Sea, but I saw no enemy coming, so I almost fell asleep next to my gun, but that was another matter.
Yeah, you wouldn't want to do that.
But Holland tried to remain neutral, because they were neutral during the First World War. Our Queen so fit at that time, the First World War, to remain neutral. But since Germany invaded Holland and through Holland and Belgium to attack the French in Paris and behind the Maginot line, Holland was at war. Mm. And a part of Holland was inundated, but the Germans were so strong that I think we surrendered after a week, because they bombed Rotterdam, and we had some 1,200 casualties in Rotterdam, and then our government decided to surrender.
Yeah, you were way overmatched.
And
so that's when you became a prisoner of war.
And no, this was in the Netherlands, but I was in the other side of the ocean. I was in the Dutch East Indies. So that was the story in Europe, and the Dutch East Indies remained free for another year and a half until the Japanese came, because the Japanese at that time had a bond or contract with Italy and Germany.
Yeah.
And that was the famous triangle that the Germans were very happy that the Japanese were joining the war. And Italy was not so happy. Italy was, Mussolini was the dictator of Italy at the time, Hitler was the dictator of Germany at the time, and Mussolini was a small guy, Hitler was a little taller, but I remember a scene that Mussolini was receiving Hitler, and Mussolini set himself on a sort of podium and had Hitler sit down to him, and Hitler had to look up to Mussolini. That was a scene all over the world at that time shown. Yeah. But anyway, they were together against the Allied forces, and Japan joined them later, or rather Germany got Japan so far to join the war. Mm-hmm. And that is when the war in the Pacific started. And they started very stupidly to bomb our how do you call it, where the Saratoga was sunk.
Oh, Pearl Harbor, yeah.
Yeah, Pearl Harbor. And that was in December 1943.
41, wasn't it 41?
Oh, 41, yes.
Yeah.
And when that happened, a week after that happened, the Dutch East Indies also declared war against Japan. Mm-hmm. Japan at that time had already conquered, I think, the Philippines, and they were up to Hong Kong and down to Thailand and down to Burma. And so when Japan attacked Pearl Harbor, we followed immediately President Roosevelt's declaring of war against the Japanese, that we followed that up. President Roosevelt was a very good friend of Churchill at the time. Churchill, the Prime Minister of Britain. Mm-hmm. The only thing is, President Roosevelt, who dearly was anxious to help Britain and the Allied, whatever was of the Allied, because the mainland of Europe was completely occupied by the Germans, and but President Roosevelt could not get the okay of Congress to start helping with troops. But what happened? He did help the Allied forces as much as possible with supplies, with supplies of all kinds of sorts. I don't know whether weapons were involved, but anyway, he had fleets of all kinds of supplies coming from America to Britain to support the British, at least at that way. And until Japan had the goal to attack Pearl Harbor, and that was for President Roosevelt the only way to declare war against Japan, and then he got the permission of Congress.
Right. Well, I'm interested in is when you were captured. Where were you captured? How did that happen?
I was captured on the Isle of Madura, which was a smaller island east of Java, and I was captured there when the Japanese invaded the Dutch East Indies, and then through Batavia, Singapore, we were sent up to build that railroad in Thailand.
Yeah, and
that was the railroad connecting Rangoon with Bangkok. Rangoon here from your side, Bangkok here, because their supplies in Burma, where they were, the Japanese, had to go all around the peninsula of Malaysia, and these boats were attacked by submarines of the American fleet, and roughly of the 10 commercial ships the Japanese had to send to Rangoon, I think at least about 60% was sunk by us, by the American submarines or whatever you had.
Yeah.
So they needed that railroad. The British had begun that railroad, did not finish it because they found the terrain too difficult to penetrate, but the Japanese followed the track the British had.
Yeah. So you as a prisoner of war were building this railroad.
Yes.
And there's a famous bridge, right?
And the bridge over the River Kwai, as a matter of fact, I was not a permanent worker there. I was there one day, and that was one of the last days where they had to meet a certain date to finish that bridge, because one of the higher rank military would hammer the last nail in that bridge and to finish that that bridge.
Yeah. So you got freed, you got liberated, and what did you do after the war?
After the war, I tried to rebuild my old company, but that was impossible because my old company was situated in the middle of the Isle of Java, and at that time it was impossible to travel from the capital, Batavia, into the interior, because the population of the Dutch East Indies, they were set up by the Japanese to become independent as a colony from Holland. So we did not get any enemies because of the Japanese, but all of a sudden the local people of the Dutch East Indies were a little bit, because of the Japanese education, against the Dutch, which eventually resulted in independence for the Dutch East Indies.
Well, Rene, I hate to do this, but because I'm really enjoying this conversation, and your life is fascinating. Being all the way from the Olympics into World War II and what you went through, and you're the kind of guy I could talk to for several hours, but we ran out of time, my friend. And I want to thank you for coming on the show.
Well, thank you very much.
And thank you for what you've done.
Thank you.
And it's time for me to say goodbye. So to all our veterans out there, active military and their families, we salute you for all you do. Till next time.
Yeah.
We are now entering our third year salute here at Lakefront TV. We've had many great guests and veterans organizations share their stories with us. We'd like to hear from you too. If you're a veteran or a veterans organization, Lake Sumter counties, please give us a call. Lakefront TV can be seen all over Lake County and the villages and worldwide at lakefronttv.com.